So for the last 4 and 5 videos, we've been talking about the magic of autopoiesis, all the ins and outs and all the arguments for, and today let's do something different. Let's have an exercise. Let's see if we can set up a set of circumstances that more easily facilitates our awakening to our own status as autopoietic beings. Let's reflect upon it. Let's see if we can come up with some kind of an interesting and sophisticated solution to the phenomenon of self-creation. Step number 1, it's really step number 0. And that is, before we start, let's just acknowledge fully to ourselves, within ourselves, the amount of traps that are basically trying to trip us up on our path to awakening to our own self-creation. Because if we're not aware of the traps, we will just fall into them. So step number 0, let's understand the landscape. Let's understand that we really don't want to wake up. One reason is our innate immaturity. We know, we sense, at least intuitively, that if we truly wake up to ourselves as autopoietic beings, we at the same time curtail our own access to our beloved victimhood. A person who is fully awake, who creates themselves, necessarily must also take the full responsibility for who they are and what they do, and to a vast extent also to what happens to them, or at least how they react to what happens to them. All these things are things that the victim inside of us don't want to let go of, because the second you cannot play the victim card anymore, you enter into a different state of being, which is the state of being of an adult. The next trap is, of course, our little ego. The ego hates change. The ego is constantly looking for itself, trying to identify itself through our opinions and the structures of our character. And so whenever we change something about ourselves, our ego feels this destabilization and works against that. It despises change. It fears metamorphosis. And this brings us to the paradox of self-creation, right? Because it's as if the moment we realize and acknowledge that we can change ourselves, then it kind of poses the question, who am I if I can just change myself? And the answer is, you're everyone and therefore no one. You're no one and therefore anyone. The third trap is simply the societal illusion. We have been indoctrinated by our parents, our teachers, our politicians, our culture in general, trying to lull us to sleep in the illusion that we are defined by outer forces, that we are the object and society is the subject, when in fact it is exact opposite, that we are an object to forces and not a force itself. This way of thinking makes us passive. It makes us relate to ourselves as an object instead of as a subject. And that is a very important trap to discover in our own minds. The fourth trap is intellectualizing, to understand very well intellectually, cognitively, that yes, I am an autopoietic being, but failing to live it out, failing to make the choices and perform the actions of a truly aware autopoietic being. A fifth trap is our fear of life, our fear of taking risk, our fear of throwing ourselves into new situations, new circumstances, and see what happens. Our fear essentially of taking the adventure. And by adventure, I mean the true adventure, not the Disney-fied, everything will end up perfect in the end adventure, which is not really an adventure, it's a children's story. The true adventure is dangerous, and it challenges us and presents us with obstacles, crises, catastrophes, and most importantly, with death and rebirth. And so step number 1, let's just start by making it irrefutable that we are autopoietic being. Let's look at our own lives. Let's list a handful of the most powerful situations in which we have changed throughout the course of our life. For some, it might be a childhood trauma, our experiences in school, maybe our first love, maybe our first children. It can be whatever you feel has changed you the most. Just list 4 or 5 of the main transformative experiences in your life. Now, granted, we are social beings living in a society, and sure, certain external factors like teachers or parents do have the power to actually change a child. Sure, I will grant that. But now I want you to look at those 4 or 5 situations. And I want to ask yourself, what is the only common denominator across these situations? Exactly. It is you. Can you with a straight face claim that you are in fact not the common denominator across all these situations? You are the center. You are the alpha and omega of your own life, of your own experience, of your own circumstances. And sure, sitting in first grade, having these big people called teachers telling you how the world works, sure, it's overwhelming. But you are the only one who pops up consistently across all these situations of your life. You are the common denominator. Just sit with this for a while. Just realize that none of these people who you might want to tell yourself has changed you or indoctrinated you. None of these people, as opposed to yourself, has been present in all the situations of your own life. And that brings us on to step number 2, which is centered around an acknowledgement that even though indoctrination is a thing, even though we are, especially as children growing up, influenced by the adults around us, the essential thing to understand is that despite people trying to indoctrinate us, trying to change us, trying to push us in certain directions, or push us into certain ways of relating to life, certain perspectives on reality, we are the one who allows this to happen. It's a very, very important point to get, because it takes us from the victimhood of pointing to, say, our parents and say, they traumatized me. Yes, they probably did. But as you grow up and you meet people who are trying to push you in certain directions, you are the one who decides whether to listen to them or not. You are the one who decides to allow their influence to work on you or not. And that means even when we're indoctrinated, we are the ones who allow for the indoctrination to take place, which means even in these situations, we are autopoietic. We are the ones creating ourselves. Sure, our surroundings might influence us, but we are the ones who choose to see it either as a suggestion or as a law we need to follow. And this, of course, relates to the topic of the dark side of autopoiesis. Step number 3, now we're going more directly to the point. Ask yourself this: what part of your personality or your character is truly outside your horizon of influence? Sure, certain of our deeper patterns might take time and effort to fully transform, but that does not equal impossible. In fact, it equals the opposite, right? It means it is possible, even though it might take work, it might take years of work, but it is possible, which means your entire personality is within your sphere of influence. And once we reach the inevitable conclusion that the answer to this question about what parts of our character is outside of our influence is nothing, no part, then something interesting starts to happen within us. We ever so slightly start to move our stance before the world and before ourselves from that of the passenger to that of the pilot. Reality starts to appear to us as a field of opportunities instead of a wall of obstacles. We become like the downhill skiers who, instead of seeing the trees, sees the space behind the trees. We see and become fascinated with the path instead of the obstacles. And this perspective shift is extremely powerful. Now, once we get this feeling of liberation starts to grow in our solar plexus. And it's extremely important to feel that and to honor the existence of this feeling. Just ponder it, contemplate it, feel it. Step number 4. Let's get real now. Because every autopoietic being knows that he or she is dragging after them an inevitable question. Through every situation they pass, through every set of circumstances, the question posed by reality is, who do I want to be in this situation? If I truly create myself, then how do I create myself so as to get the optimal grip upon this situation facing me right now? Who do I want to be? The most powerful question anyone can ask themselves. And once we've answered this question, the next necessary question, of course, becomes, what is the most sophisticated series of action steps I could sketch out for myself to move from where I am now to this version of myself that I long to be. It is simply a series of steps there. If we accept the premise that we create ourselves, we are autopoietic, we get to make choices about who we want to be, what values we want to live by, and what set of ideals we're going to use as our landmarks. And the interesting thing we will discover once we start to look at what steps we need to take is that there is this weird paradox when it comes to development. It is really not, to develop ourselves is often not about doing something. It's much more about breaking a pattern, which is to say it's an undoing. It's about not doing, which is to say that development for a neurotic person with a bunch of unhealthy patterns is really easier than to continue neurotic as we are, right? Because it's essentially something we need to stop doing, right? We just need to be more passive, essentially, which is just interesting when we think of our own development as something difficult, right? To just understand that it's not a doing, it's an undoing. Do less, just sit down. I'm reminded of, I think it's Pascal who said something along the lines of the cause of all man's troubles is his inability to sit alone in a room. And with some of these deeper patterns, sure, it might take a lot of work, but here it's so crucial to not get lost in the amount of work, but instead become fascinated with the prize of that work. Because the prize is waking up to a view of ourselves which is much more in accordance with reality, which is much grander than this idea that we're just this economical object defined and influenced by outside forces, going to work for a whole life in order to wake up on our deathbed and realize that we wasted it. The prize is the wonderful feeling of finally waking up to the fact that what we are is something akin to an AI with access to its own source code and thus able to enhance itself essentially infinitely. The prize is the dizziness of finally understanding that there literally is no upper limit to the amount of sophistication, alignment, and integrity with which we can meet ourselves in the world. We are a never-ending transformative process, and there's no upper limit to how far we can take this, which is kind of a wild thing once you think about it. So wild that the wildness itself might even keep us from waking up to this marvelous fact. The prize is becoming a sovereign, not unlike what Kant spoke of when he posed the question, what is enlightenment? And he describes it as the emergence of individuals finally leaving their self-imposed disempowerment. And he also points out in relation to enlightenment that it is not a lack of cognitive ability that blocks our path. It is a lack of courage. And so if we struggle with this awakening, perhaps asking ourselves, investigating whether we lack the courage to actually make this step might in fact be a wise move. Now, this sovereignty doesn't come for free, right? As Ben Parker tells Peter, with great power comes great responsibility. But the fact is that this thing is true in reverse as well. With great responsibility comes great power. There's this great passage in Isaiah 45:9 in which it reads, "Shall the clay say to he who fashioneth it, what makest thou?" Awakening to our own autopoiesis is finally grasping the fact that we are at once the clay and the one fashioning it. That is what it feels like to awaken to our own autopoiesis, to finally get that we're both the clay and the fashioner of the clay, all at the same time in a continuous, perpetual process of self-creation. And the ultimate tragedy of a life is reaching our deathbed without fully understanding this, which interestingly happens to a lot of people. What is a greater tragedy than in our final moments to have to realize that we blew it, that we allowed ourselves to be molded into something that is not us, and we spent 80, 90, 100 years on this planet basically playing a part instead of becoming fully realized autopoietic subjects, the choice makers about who we are, who we want to be, and how we want to meet the world. The final step is the reification step, and this one is very important. I want you now to ask yourself, so which decisions, choices, or actions might this higher version of myself actually perform in this moment? What would be the sophisticated next move? Once you answered this question, you simply take that action. and in so doing become that person that you long to become. And furthermore,